To the honourable member for Niagara West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to thank the residents for Niagara West. Every time I get a chance to speak in the House, I never want to forget the fact that all of us that are here are elected because of the members in our riding, and so I never want to take that for granted. And I just want to thank them for the opportunity I have to serve them to the best of my ability. And so I just want to say thanks again to the residents of Niagara West. So, my question and my thought process around here really is what's going on with the Liberal Party, and are they competent managers? And, we're talking about a question of privilege right now, but my biggest concern in this next election is who is the most competent to run this country. And I can assure you the least competent government in the history of this country is this present Liberal government under their current leader, who loves his photo ops, loves making promises that he has no intention of delivering on whatsoever. 2 billion trees. Great one, guys. Great one. How many trees have we actually planted? Well, we can't get that information because these guys aren't very transparent. Oh, another promise, 2015, to be the most transparent government.
Remember
wow,
that?
We missed that one pretty quick. That one fell off the bandwagon almost right away. So, when I look and listen at what these guys are talking about, one of the challenges, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe a word that's coming out of their mouth. These guys are not competent. These guys are not great managers. At the end of the day, these guys will say anything to get elected, and for the most part have a lack of follow-through and are not prepared to actually do the hard work or get things done. And so I just want to work through a couple of things as we talk about that. And I had my colleague from Provencher talk about a few things that I was going to add, and to, I guess, the member from Kingston, the Islands, who said we had, people in the basement writing speeches. I can assure him that's not the case. And there's certainly not PMO talking points. I'll give him that as well. But, there's so many scandals. When the men of Provencher started talking about that, I thought, oh my goodness, I forgot about all those scandals. Like, there's just so many to remember. And so I had wrote down and a number of them myself that I just wanted to reach out and talk about. And, we're talking about transparency here. We're talking about trying to get information. When we request information and it comes back and it's all redacted, and for those of you out there that, may not have been listening to the debate, redacted is, that big black Sharpie, right? That big black magic marker that goes over all the answers. It gives you probably less information from the magic marker and from what you requested than the actual information that you were trying to get. And so when I look at what has gone on here, it would seem like this is not the first time that this government has offered up or not offered up a number of things. I remember Moranche talked about the Winnipeg Labs, and I think that's something that troubles me greatly when we look at what's going on there. When we asked for documentation, and we absolutely got stonewalled to the point where we actually brought someone to the bar, actually I'm not a member of Parliament, something that hadn't been done over a century, and still refused to give us that information. And then we found out these scientists were working for the Communist Party of China. Mm-hmm. Give me a break, in terms of being able to vet people. And I'm sure that was never happened before. This government's always good at vetting people as far as exactly. So, when I look at that and I feel like, at the end of the day, not only were they not vetted, but they were actually taking information out of the lab and sending it back to China. You're probably sending it via Canada Post, as a matter of fact. Trying to make sure it gets there. I mean, this is unbelievable. And so if you start looking at some of the other things that they've gone on, they talk about, we hear all the time, the fact that, we're looking at things are going on, and you guys are the party of big business and that. I do remember not so long ago, $12 million that this government actually gave to Loblaws. Think about this, Loblaws, of all people. They gave $12 million to Loblaws for freezers, and not long after, Loblaws got charged in a $500 million bread fixing.
Yeah.
Think about that for 1 second. Yeah. Not only did a company like Loblaws not require or need the money because they're doing very well, but this government actually, at the end of the day, after giving the money, this large corporation, this Canadian corporation, agreed to pay a fine of $500 million. Think about that. How much bread were they fixing if they were prepared to pay a fine like that? You know, someone mentioned Jasper, and I think we do need to raise Jasper as an issue. Absolutely tragic. And as more information comes out as to what was going on there, and the fact that this government neglected any type of advice of experts or neglected anything, it's absolutely devastating. I feel for the people of Jasper that, quite frankly, you know, many times have been said we need to do something around fire management. We need to do something around what's going on with all this dry brush. We also read stories of how volunteer fire people showed up and they were actually turned away. And I got to think to myself, is this a government that you actually want to trust in order, you know, as they lead? As they continue to lead? Is 9 years not enough for these guys in terms of moving forward? It was mentioned as well, Frank Bailiff. I mean, I can't help but not reemphasize that one. $237 million in contracts he got 2 months after he left office. I mean, talk about hitting the payday. You know, at the end of the day, I don't know if you could have worked here for 10 or 20 years and be able to get that kind of contract, you know, to the tune of what he did. And then we see what happened with all those ventilators. They were actually scrapped, never used. And so, I mean, you start talking about some of the inside connections, and that's what this is about. We're talking about $400 million in contracts almost from SDTC, Science, what's a SD? Development Technology Canada. You know, and we're talking about that, and we're talking about insiders that got money. So we see this happening over and over again, and that's the challenge that I see, is that this is a government that loves taking care of themselves, loves taking care of their buddies, and quite frankly, I'm not sure if we can actually trust them. Let's go back to some of the promises that they've made in terms of what they're going to do. The 2 billion trees was a good one, but I also love the fact that they want to build almost 4 million homes. But the same period of time. And so, you know, let's, you know, if we look at the math there, we realize that we probably need to build almost $500,000 homes a year, 500,000 homes a year. And currently we're building less than 250,000. And so it's pretty easy when you want to just make commitments that just so people will be happy to hear what you have to say, when you absolutely have no idea how you're actually going to fulfill these contracts, how you're going to actually get these houses built, and how you're going to actually get some of these obligations met. And so I think that's one of the things that are absolutely troubling. When I look at another thing with small businesses got crushed during COVID. They got absolutely destroyed. And this government also promised that they would be looking at a carbon tax rebate. I have not talked to one small business yet that was received a carbon tax rebate. And I certainly love to hear from this government when that's going to be, because a number of businesses actually have gone under and have struggled in such a way that the carbon tax rebate is probably not going to even be able to help them at this point in time, but it would be something that would be nice if we could move forward on that. You know, I want to also look at some of the other things that we've been talking about in the House. You know, I find it interesting that the committee continues to look at which Randy got government contracts. Like, you know, at the end of the day, why is it that we are asking all these questions of the government and we can continue to get zero response whatsoever in terms of being able to find out what kind of information we want? And then they give us a hard time and say, well, you shouldn't be asking for all that information because, quite frankly, we're not prepared to give it up at this point in time. You know, it's been said lots. I'm just going to only touch on it, but one of the reasons we're here is the number of conflicts that were offered up when it came to this Green Slush Fund. Over 186 conflicts that we've talked about, and that's obviously very concerning. You know, ArriveCAN, I'm always amazed when we start going through all these things that there was actually so many different challenges or misappropriating of funds, or it could have been done better or could have been more efficient, that it goes back to my original premise. This government is incompetent. This government doesn't have the ability to get things done in a timely and efficient way. You know, when I think about the ArriveCAN app at almost $54 million, or just under $60 million, for an app that could have probably been produced or could have been done for a little over $80,000. I look at the number of, you know, testimony that we've seen. I've seen, you know, documentation for the Auditor General, right, when it includes government officials lying and attempting to silence whistleblowers, right? This culture of openness, this culture of transparency, we see government actually suppressing whistleblowers and trying to suspend people without pay for telling the truth to committee. We see consultants making millions and millions of dollars while they didn't add any value to work, with inappropriate relationships and friendships between government officials in charge of watching and awarding the multi-million-dollar contracts, and for those that were actually receiving some of those contracts as well. So, as we continue on, part of being a government is being accountable for what you do, and not only being accountable, but making sure that taxpayers receive value for the money. One of the challenges I see all the time is that when I see and talk to people about that, a lot of people come up to me and say, Dean, we're struggling right now. We are struggling with the cost of living. We're struggling with the carbon tax and the fact that everything costs more. It costs more to heat our house, costs more to buy food, costs more for rent, and a number of these things. And what ends up happening is when they see the government money not being spent appropriately in a way that makes some sense, that is transparent, and that makes sure that people get our value for money, people ask the question, they say, why are you guys not taking better care of our taxpayer dollars? And so, those are the things that we continue to question, and we should be allowed to question. It was mentioned earlier before that's our job as opposition, is to question what's going on in government. It's to hold them to account and to make sure that they're actually receiving taxpayer money. Now, I know we've been talking about SDTC, and we've been talking about a number of these things. I think we almost forgot about all the awards that went to McKinsey and all the consulting contracts. Yeah. You remember that?
Yeah.
Where we had literally, over $209 million in contracts. We had 90% of the contracts the Liberal government awarded to McKinsey were given out without proper guidelines. Right, so at the end of the day, money's being handed out without following any type of process. In many cases, it was unclear what the purpose of the contracts were for, so they didn't know what they were for or what the outcome was supposed to be achieved. So in one case, Canada Border Service Agency saw that a McKinsey did not qualify for a contract, so they revised the statement of work so McKinsey could qualify. Think about that for a second. They offered out a contract and realized that they actually weren't going to be doing the work, or it wasn't defined. And so what they did was they actually took the contract and reworked it so that McKinsey could actually get the work. And so, you start looking at these sole source contracts, and there was never any type of justification explained about why it was. There was, over 70% of all contracts were awarded to McKinsey were non-competitive. 13 out of 17 contracts given to McKinsey where security clearances should have been necessary, but the Liberal government allowed McKinsey to operate without them. So it's not a surprise that the Prime Minister gave McKinsey hundreds of millions of dollars, because at that time we know McKinsey was led by Dominic Barton, who was a close friend of the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. So there's no surprise right there. Once again, we talk about Liberal connected friends getting money and getting contracts as a result of that. So we know that Dominic Barton was a key figure in the Liberals Advisory Council on Economic Growth in their Indo-Pacific Advisory Committee, and it was Barton's idea to create the failed scandal-plagued Canadian Infrastructure Bank, and it was Barton and McKinsey who had to pay nearly $600 million in damages to help create the opioid crisis, right, through that. So if we look at a number of these things, we realize that when it comes to competence or the ability to get things done, there needs to be accountability. And that's why we as the opposition are here asking questions. That is why we are here, demanding that we get a chance to see these documents, that we get a chance to see these documents unredacted, that we're able to move on to the appropriate authorities. The appropriate authorities will do what they need to do. We're absolutely not saying or indicating what that should happen. What we're saying, though, is that in order for the government, for the RCMP to do their work, what needs to happen is that they need to be able to see that stuff. And so when we ask for a number of these things, and we end up with not receiving anything at all, that's why we're here. That's why we're here talking. That's why we're here discussing. That's why we're here debating. And this could all be over right away. Provide the documentation, and we will be on to something else. And so I think that's that's obviously an issue. And part of the other challenge we've had is that we realize that through this contracting system, the RCP revealed earlier this year that they had charged a scamster who received $250,000 through the Prime Minister's broken contracting system, that a Liberal NDP coalition blocked questions to the officials responsible for the government, We saw the RCMP previously testified they had multiple investigations of federal contracting, in addition to their active investigation in the Prime Minister's $60 million ArriveCAN app, which was supposed to cost the taxpayers $80,000. So we go over and over a number of these things, and we realize at the end of the day that the people that are doing well from this are liberal insiders and those that are connected.
Always.
You know, and so we look at even what happened with our Minister of Trade and dealing with public relations, pomp and circumstance, conflict of interest. Contracts were awarded for communication services in 2019 and 20. The Ethics Commissioner said there was no excuse for contracting with a friend's company. And the Commissioner went on to say the Minister twice failed to recognize the potential conflict of interest involving a friend and oversight of our obligations on the Conflict of Interest Act. You know, and why does this sound familiar? Because here we are, I just mentioned before, you know, the terms of the contracts with the two Randys that we're trying to get to the bottom of, and how some of these contracts were awarded during COVID. And then, of course, you know, it's been raised before, and I think it doesn't hurt to mention it again, is the whole issue of the Prime Minister's ethics convictions, dealing with the ArriveCAN and the Paradise Island vacation. So, you know, it was charged with an ethics violation after spending time on the Bahamas Island, and they believed, the investigators believed, that there was reasonable grounds to think fraud may have been committed.
Wow.
So ultimately, the RCMP didn't charge them because of the lack of the clarity of the federal rules that applied to the accepting of gifts.
Corruption.
But the Ethics Commissioner, however, meaning the Prime Minister was found guilty of breaking laws and violated sections 5, 11, 12, 21 of the Conflict of Interest Act. So the Ethics Commissioner questioned the Prime Minister's friendship with the ArriveCAN, and the Prime Minister used the words, he was a close family friend, to refer to the ArriveCAN, but the Ethics Commissioners found that this was not the case. So the Prime Minister took the trip to Paradise Island and was brought in a private helicopter. The Prime Minister thinks that he's above the law and that Canadians are actually well aware of it. I mean, I think that what Canadians are finding right now is that they believe there's so much hypocrisy. They believe that their tax dollars are not being taken care of in a responsible way. We have SNC-Lavalin that was mentioned here before again, where the Ethics Commissioner found that the Prime Minister violated Section 9 of the Conflict of Interest by attempting to influence then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, a Quebec-based engineering firm. So the ruling stated that the Prime Minister improperly used his position of authority to attempt to further the private interests of SNC-Lavalin by seeking to pressure Wilson-Raybould to offer a deferred prosecution agreement, which would have allowed the company to avoid a criminal charge and corruption charges. The Prime Minister was found guilty of breaking Canada's ethics laws through the efforts to protect a corrupt, politically connected company by firing his first Indigenous Attorney General, who would not bend to the Prime Minister's orchestrated campaign of political pressure. The former Ethics Commissioner indicated that witnesses said that they have relevant evidence to offer but were constrained by the limitations put in place by that Liberal Prime Minister. The exact same tactics blocked the RCMP from probing the possibility of criminal charges relating to the Prime Minister's orchestrated and systematic campaign to pressure then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to overrule the Independent Public Prosecution Service and offer the SNC a deferred prosecution agreement. So last year, the Liberal NDP Bloc Coalition censored the RCMP by shutting down the Commissioner's testimony in committee. They did whatever it took to protect the Prime Minister from potential criminal charges. Common sense Conservatives would continue to hold the Liberal NDP government and the Bloc allies accountable. And Canadians certainly deserve the transparency and the right to know. And then the last one, and I know, Mr. Speaker, I only have a minute left, and I need more time if I'm going to go through all the scandals. But, you know, we talked about We Charity. And, you know, these things happened early on, but I think what people fail to understand is that this, you know, this creates distrust when it comes to constituents, when it comes to taxpayers, when it comes to voters. And the job of the official opposition is to hold the government to account. Yep. And so that is what we are attempting to do as we move forward with this question of privilege and trying to make sure that these documents, the proper documents, go to the people that need to have a look at them. We have a responsibility as members of Parliament to do the best job that we can for our constituents. And we need to be responsible for taxpayers' dollars. And so that is what this government, this opposition, is going to continue to do to this government. We will continue to hold them accountable on issues when it matters with the public purse, when it affects our constituents, and we'll continue to pressure the government and their supporters for answers to all these questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.